Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board.
Growing more with less is the mantra of Nebraska's corn farmers, and they're using incredible technology to do it. Soil moisture monitors let them know when their crop needs water and how much. GPS systems eliminate overlaps in the field, saving fuel and money. New hybrids reduce the use of pesticides and increase yields. When you're talking new technology and innovation, Nebraska corn farmers are all ears. Nebraska's family corn farmers, sustaining innovation.
Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. On this episode, Elaine Kub looks at market reaction to the USDA's estimates on acres and stocks. Ron Plain dissects the inventory of hogs and pigs across the U.S. Peter Sikkema describes the critical period for controlling weeds in corn, and Keith Glewen discusses results from the 2016 Soybean Management Field Days. Elaine Kub is our corn and soybean market analyst this week. The U.S. Department of Agriculture believes American farmers are gearing up to plant more soybeans than ever before. In estimates released Friday, the USDA projected growers would sow 89.5 million acres of beans this spring, nearly matching the anticipated 90 million acres of corn. Nebraska is expected to be the third largest planter of corn and ranked sixth in soybeans. The agency's numbers for grain stocks indicated 10% more corn in all positions across the U.S. on March 1st compared to a year ago, and 13% more soybeans. We talked with Elaine Wednesday afternoon and started by asking how markets have reacted to last week's numbers.
Quite quietly, actually. We got the reaction on the day of the report on Friday. The soybean market in particular did fall in response to some bearish numbers, particularly in the grain stocks report. So that's to be expected. But a lot of the times, many years, you'll have a big move on report day, and then the next week the markets will follow up with a continued trend. I mean, that report day will sort of kick off a trend, and that has not happened this year. I mean, fortunately for farmers perhaps who don't have very much sold, fortunately we have not seemed to kick off a big bearish trend after the reports. Rather, the markets just seem to be kind of limping along here sideways, which is good news, all things considered.
Let's talk about a few things from those numbers. First, in grain stocks, what do the numbers indicate about demand?
You know, I think it was a surprise in the soybean usage that to see that quarterly demand, the December onwards demand, fall year over year, which didn't really jive with all of the good export numbers that we saw week to week and domestic, crush numbers. I think the market was definitely expecting to see better demand in that quarterly, or implied by the quarterly stocks report, and to not get that was the surprise, and it was the main reason why we saw the soybean market fall by double digits. That being said, I mean, what can we do from that at this point going forward? I think it's more of just a numbers game and how it has affected everybody's stocks to use tables, but not a major problem as far as demand implications going forward.
I want to talk about acres as well, and if you look at two specific states, Kansas and North Dakota, together they'll plant 1.8 million acres more of soybeans this year, and the shift over the last 10 years, 5 years has come at the expense of wheat. How low are wheat acres right now?
They are the lowest they have ever been in recorded history. I mean, since pre-Columbian times, basically, or at least since the USDA has been keeping track of nationwide wheat acres. 46.1 million acres is the lowest they've ever had. This is just a trend, globally a trend of how wheat can be produced anywhere. The world doesn't have to come to the United States to produce that wheat. And so, yeah, we see these western states, Kansas, North Dakota, South Dakota, even Minnesota, all of those are the geographically the states that have dropped a number of wheat acres and have typically moved to soybeans. But in the Kansas and North Dakota, some of those acres are also moving to canola. I mean, it's an interesting dynamic of how you choose to shift out of it, but the general trend is definitely to shift away from the wheat acres. Absolutely.
One more thing before we get into selling strategies. Let's talk about the current trade environment. How comfortable do you feel right now, both in corn when you look at the rhetoric between the U.S. and Mexico, and in soybeans with the U.S. and its biggest buyer in China?
Right, this is going to be headlines this week with Trump meeting with the Chinese president. And I'd say, long term, hopefully it won't matter because cooler heads will always prevail. And we are complementary trading partners to each other. They, rely on our grain, particularly our soybeans. And we, as American consumers, have learned to rely on Chinese manufacturing. So hopefully long term that will be fine. And hopefully short term, the grain markets or the futures markets will ignore any sort of fireworks that come out of this week's meeting. And I think that should be the case. I mean, we certainly are worried about losing market share in the corn market to Mexico, but on a day-to-day basis, looking at the futures markets, anytime that those headlines have hit, they have not necessarily been reflected in the futures prices. So I think that, I think broadly we should be worried about antagonizing our trading partners. Absolutely, that's not a good idea, but price-wise, hopefully the markets shouldn't be too terribly affected. What's basis like up there? Well, not great. And I was going to mention with the wheat situation, that's particularly disheartening for a lot of the reasons I think why the Kansas or the Southern Plains have moved away from the wheat is not even reflected in the price ratios that you see on the futures market, but more so in the basis. Like the nationwide average new crop basis bid for 12% hard red winter wheat is $3.40. That is not very promising, and I think that's a big reason why we're seeing those acres move away from wheat. Okay, old crop selling strategies, if you have any left, Elaine. Well, I think that grain stocks report did indicate that there's a lot of corn still sitting around on farms, which suggests it's not necessarily the case that it's not hedged, but it certainly suggests that farmers have been, fallen behind on selling their old crop corn. Soybeans, they've done a much better job of selling soybeans and keeping ahead of that. But corn, I think you've really got to have a plan to make sure that you've got a place to take that this summer and an idea of when you're going to take it there, because it's not, I think that unless we have some strange weather situation arise, which there's no reason to believe that it's going to happen yet, then I think we're in a low price scenario for the foreseeable future, and there's no reason to sit around and wait for $4 necessarily. Would you get more aggressive with selling the new crop as well so you aren't in this same situation next year? Absolutely. Today, it's a good idea to get started with small bits of sales so that you can average your prices out over time. But absolutely be prepared for a summer rally and hit that hard for new crop sales. Absolutely. Export data released Wednesday shows China was the largest buyer of soybeans from October through February, accounting for more than 71% of the total. Mexico was the top destination for both American wheat and corn. We also have a look at hog markets this week with Ron Plain from the University of Missouri. U.S. pork exports in February were 16% higher than during February of 2016. Mexico was the largest buyer, taking nearly a third of American shipments. U.S. pork imports for February, meanwhile, were the smallest in more than 2.5 years. Across the country, farmers have continued to grow the U.S. herd. The USDA's latest inventory report showed producers set March 1st records for the number of market hogs, the largest pig crop, the most pigs saved per litter, and the total tally of all hogs and pigs. We talked with Ron Wednesday morning and began by asking for his thoughts on the latest quarterly estimates.
Well, Jeff, lots of hogs out there. The summary on this, 4.4% more market hogs than a year ago. The total herd up 4.2%. That's going to give us hog slaughter this year somewhere around 122 million head, breaking last year's record of 118 million. So it's going to mean plenty of pork for consumers and some lower prices for hog farmers.
Does this report indicate we're in a growth mode? Where are we in that scheme of growing or contracting?
We're still growing. Hog numbers were down sharply in 2014 because of the PED virus, and we bounced back and we're still growing, although indications are we're going to slow that growth. Winter fairings were up 2.8%. The forecast is the number of sows that will farrow this spring will be up 1.4, and this summer down 0.4%. So if USDA is right on those numbers, we're going from modest growth back towards a steady situation.
Are there any shifts happening when it comes to where pork production is occurring?
Well, there's been some shifts in the breeding herd, it looks like. Missouri was up strong, 16% in our breeding herd numbers in this report. Market hogs still seem to be moving towards the Corn Belt. Iowa and Indiana up, I believe it was 7 and 8% respectively.
How much pressure did these numbers put on market prices?
Well, prices have been coming down. Basically, we've lost $8 per hundredweight since the 1st of February on carcass hog prices, which is a bit unusual for this time of year. But, there's just more hogs than was expected, and that has been a drag on prices.
Where do you think they go from here?
Well, seasonally, the odds are very strong in our favor that we will end April with higher hog prices than we start, and we will end May with still higher hog prices. So I'm guessing we're probably going to put on maybe $10 per hundredweight on carcass prices over the next 2.5 months.
Margins getting squeezed?
Well, yes, right now we're kind of in a break even to a little dab of red ink for the average hog producer. But fortunately, feed costs are down, and we're expecting that with stronger prices this summer that we'll make some money several months in a row.
You talked about the number of hogs that are out there right now. How heavy are they when they go to market?
Well, that's been a positive factor, Jeff. Market weights have been down about 2 pounds on average, according to the Iowa-Minnesota live weight series. The long-term trend is for heavier weights. I wouldn't be surprised if weights might average a bit higher in the second half of this year than they did a year ago.
We also got U.S. pork export data this week for the month of February. What did it indicate?
Things are going our way. The first 2 months of this year, pork imports are down 14%, exports up 18%. So that's exactly what hog producers would want to see. Very strong exports to Mexico, South Korea, and continued strength to Japan. So all the trade data is looking in our favor.
Yeah, those have been the top 3 buyers. Why have they been so strong year over year?
Well, we've got plenty of supply and lower prices, record hog numbers, and you've got pork available to export at a competitive price.
Would you expect import numbers to still be pressured?
Well, most of our imports of pork comes from Canada, and Canada's also supplying more pork to across the Pacific. So I wouldn't be surprised if pork import numbers continue to lag behind a year ago.
As Ron said, most of America's pork imports come from the north. Canada accounted for 72% of the market during February. Poland was this country's second largest supplier, shipping in 10% of the overall total. The first update on 2017 corn planting across the U.S. is expected Monday in the USDA's now weekly crop progress report. Once plants emerge, Peter Sikkema says it's imperative farmers control weeds. Peter is a professor at the University of Guelph in Ridgetown, Ontario, about an hour and a half east of Detroit. Part of his research details corn yield losses from weed pressures during what he calls the critical period. Peter was on UNL's East Campus recently, where we talked about management during that time frame, but we started by asking for a background of resistance issues across his country.
So in terms of herbicide resistance in Canada, it would have started in 1973 when the first triazine-resistant weed was identified in the province. Since then, we have about 10 weed species that are resistant to the triazines or the group 5 herbicides. We have about 10 weed species that are resistant to the group 2 herbicides. And the one that's of greatest concern in the province are glyphosate-resistant weeds. The first glyphosate-resistant weed was identified in 2008. It was glyphosate-resistant giant ragweed. And since then, we have glyphosate-resistant mare's tail, common ragweed, and water hemp.
You've done some work looking at the critical period of corn when it comes to weed control. Can you define what the critical period is?
Yeah, and I think the critical period of weed control in corn is from the day that corn emerges from the soil, and you have to keep your corn clean through the 6-leaf stage of corn or the V4 stage. And any weeds that emerge after the 6-leaf stage of corn or V4, they will not impact corn yield. They may cause harvest problems. They may return weed seeds to the soil. But in almost all situations, there's no negative impact on corn yield. If a grower keeps his corn perfectly weed-free from the day of emergence until the 6-leaf stage, any weeds that come in after that do not impact corn yield.
During that time, though, how detrimental can weed pressures be?
Extremely. And so I think that there's a hidden yield loss that occurs in corn and soybean fields across the U.S. Midwest and Ontario. And it's all because of delayed post-emergence weed control. In studies conducted in Ontario, where weeds are 1 inch high at the time of the first post-emergence application, our studies say that there's a 2 bushel per acre yield loss. So if a farmer waits until the weeds are 4 inches in height before he puts on his first application of a post-herbicide, our data says that there's an 8 bushel per acre yield loss. That's a hidden yield loss that occurs across the U.S. Midwest as well as the province of Ontario. A farmer in Ontario could get 195 bushels of corn per acre, and he could be really happy with that. The reality is he could have had 205 or 210 bushels per acre, and nobody can document what that number is, but it occurs every year across the province of Ontario, and this hidden yield loss is occurring all the time.
I hope my numbers are right, but I think in your studies you showed that in the worst possible conditions, weeds could take away 3 bushels per day of corn yield. Is that accurate?
That is correct. In our most competitive environment, if you spray on Tuesday morning versus Monday morning, and you're relying on a total post-emergence weed control program, you can lose 3 bushels per acre just by delaying the application by 24 hours. I think most farmers do not appreciate how rapidly corn yield loss occurs. So if you were planning to spray your cornfield, let's say on a Monday morning, and you had a rain event on Sunday night and you couldn't spray, and then you had another rain event on Wednesday or Thursday, and let's say that your application was delayed from one Monday to the next, so that's 7 days at 3 bushels per acre, you're losing 20 bushels per acre. If corn sells for $4 a bushel, you've lost $80 per acre. If you farm 1,000 acres of corn, you've lost $80,000 by spraying 1 week too late. So the yield losses are just dramatic.
So a follow-up to close on that. Rain is one thing, but in Nebraska, wind is certainly another huge problem, huge hurdle that growers face when they're trying to spray. What is the advice to making sure that you're spraying to control weed pressures, but also doing it responsibly and not further increasing the problems of resistance?
Yep, and so I think that's a really good question. Anytime I do an extension talk in the province of Ontario, I always advise corn and soybean growers to use a 2-pass weed control program. I think you have to put down your best soil-applied herbicide, and best is going to be determined by what the weed spectrum is in each individual field. It's going to be dependent on the soil characteristics as well as any future crops that are planned in that rotation. You apply your best soil-applied herbicide to protect the full yield potential of the corn during that critical period of weed control. Then if you do have escapes with your soil-applied herbicide, then you apply an appropriate post-emergence herbicide to control any weed escapes that occur during that critical period of weed control. So I think all farmers should use a 2-pass weed control program, and it's strictly for financial reasons. They're going to maximize net returns on their farm by using 2-pass weed control program.
You can find more information about weed management options for the 2017 growing season in our interview with Nebraska Extension's Amit Jalla from the March 24th episode of Market Journal. The April Nebraska farmer says electrical resistive tomography, or ERT, is a kind of subsurface imagery used to measure seismic activity, map the ocean floor, and locate oil beneath the Earth's surface. This month's magazine says in 2011, Nebraska Extension's Jason Gross, along with ag engineers from the USDA's Agricultural Research Service, began using ERT imagery to track root activity in pastures and row crops. You can read how the team has put this technology to use in the April Nebraska Farmer. Nebraska crop producers will soon get material that may be able to help them make more informed management decisions during the growing season. More than 20,000 growers will receive mailings that include information on research initiatives from the Nebraska Corn Board, a pocket field guide with topics such as insect and pest identification in corn and soybeans, and results from research conducted at the 2016 Soybean Management Field Day sites. Nebraska Extension's Keith Glewen joined us recently to discuss the yearly Soybean Research Update booklet.
Thanks to the support from the Nebraska Soybean Checkoff Board, Nebraska Extension has partnered with them for approximately 16 years in conducting Soybean Management Field Days across different geographical areas of Nebraska. And at these field day sites, which are located on farmers' fields, we conduct replicated research that is the backdrop of the field days in August. And of course, we collect many different types of data during the growing season as well as harvest data. And this past year, fortunately, we had some good results, and some results you would say didn't pan out the way we thought they would. Okay.
Give me an overview of what
Sure.
people might read about in this year's booklet.
In short, you know, we look at studies where we're applying seed treatments to the seed, whether they be a fungicide or insecticide, and we're applying foliar fungicides during the growing season.
It's readily accessible.
We looked at studies where we looked at different fertilizers, different additions of nutrients. And in short, a lot of times we don't see a yield response. And if we do see a yield response, it doesn't cover the cost of the treatment. Now, at some sites, under certain environmental conditions, you know, we've seen a positive yield response, but oftentimes it's pretty near a wash.
What did you do this year on water management at some of these locations?
Well, there too, of course, we're under the, we work with Mother Nature, okay? So can't control that environment always, and we just didn't see a lot of yield response this year from irrigation treatments. However, research in the past would show that soybeans is a crop that if you water it in advance of its reproductive stages, in other words, during vegetative growth, you have a lot of vegetative growth, which market doesn't pay you for, okay?
But it looks good.
It looks good. Soybeans respond to water in their reproductive stages of growth. So again, we're talking about the R2, R3 timing of making sure that plant has adequate moisture if you're in the irrigated world. The exception to that would be if we're in a sandy soil situation or lighter textured soil. If we're having, you know, drought stress early on in the growing season, then of course an irrigation to keep the plant growing is warranted.
I assume by this point in the year you're already getting ready for next year's Soybean Management Field Days. Give me an overview of what you're looking at.
That's correct, Jeff. We'll be out at the West Central Research and Extension Center at North Platte. It's probably on the western edge of the soybean growing region in Nebraska. Then we'll be moving, and that'll be on August 8th. On August 9th, we'll be moving to Ord, Nebraska, at a farm there. And then on the 10th, we'll be south of Auburn in southeast Nebraska. And on the 11th, we'll conclude at a farm location just south of Sikkema along the Missouri River on August 11th.
Now filling in for Al Dutcher, here's Stoney Cooper from the Nebraska State Climate Office with this week's weather outlook.
Thank you, Jeff. By the way, that's a super nice tie. Taking a quick review of the March precipitation, we see that except for north central part of Nebraska, most places saw appreciable moisture. Of note is the lack of moisture in the northwestern sandhills, but nearly 4 inches for the month fell along the Missouri River from Nebraska City south. This placed March at 0.06 over average. This also reflected by the 8% decrease in the D0 and D1 drought zones in southwest and south central Nebraska, as indicated by the drought monitor. March ranked 10th warmest on record, 4.1 degrees above average. Raring to get in the field? Bare soil temperature sensors are showing upper 40s to low 50s in the southeast and lower 40s as you move towards Harrison in the northwest. Switching to the week ahead, southwest flow aloft dominates our Saturday with 70s in the northwest to 80s in the rest of the state. Most precipitation will be snagged in the Intermountain West with a slight chance of showers in the very northwest Nebraska late Saturday night. Sunday sees a digging of the trough over the Great Plains, creating an unsettled environment. 50s northwest with over 70 in the southeast. Rain chances are highest in the northwest with a late rumble of thunder possible in the east and southeast. Rain on Sunday will mostly be light, under a quarter-inch threshold as shown in this map. Monday shows the system ejecting eastward, rain ending with even a few snow or rain squalls around Chadron. This system is not forecasted to be a major precipitation event for Nebraska, though. Tuesday brings upper air ridging to the plains with temperatures rebounding into the 50s and 60s. Mostly sunny conditions throughout the rest of Nebraska, though, before the next chances of rain come into the state. Wednesday has a new system emerging from the Rockies and bringing a higher chance of precipitation. Precipitation through most of the state with lighter amounts west and a potential for over an inch in the east. Thursday continues the county fair roller coaster of precipitation and temps, with upper air ridging once again returning to Nebraska with surface high pressure. Lingering precipitation from Wednesday will be moving east, giving way to clear skies. Finally, Friday will see stiff south winds bringing warm air to Nebraska ahead of the next system. Spotty showers in the Dakotas in advance of the next rainmaker, but it'll leave most of Nebraska dry. Beyond Friday, our fine friends at the Climate Prediction Center are prognosticating an even faster warm-up for much of the plains than we would seasonally expect. But the precipitation forecast beyond Friday is a literal crapshoot, with some folks getting 7s and most of us getting 2s and 3s.
Thanks, Stoney. This week's interviews can be found individually on the Market Journal website and through the Market Journal mobile app. They include information on corn and soybean prices, hog markets, weed control in corn, and soybean production research. As always, you can keep up with Market Journal during the week by following us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Next week, Jeff Peterson from Heartland Farm Partners will be our market analyst. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.